Hi, welcome to this podcast episode 4. I am Jimmy Tan and I would like to share some thoughts about nature from the perspective of the gospel, which is also known as the good news of grace and peace. At first, when I look at the Bible, I did not really see much mentions about nature, specifically plants and animals, because it seems that the gospel focuses on humanity, and it seems that salvation is mainly or only about being saved from something in terms of human beings have lost their way, have lost the truth, and they need to realize the truth. They need to believe in order to be saved. Saved from something, and I will come to that in a while. So it seems that the plants and animals in this world, at least on planet Earth, the known planet that we see around us, that we believe is the only planet that is known to support life because of favorable circumstances. It's neither too hot nor too cold, and it supports living things, including plant animals and ourselves, human beings. And it seems that although the Bible does mention plant and animals here and there, they are more like in the background. They are not the main focus. They are not the main actors and actresses, so to speak, as if in a movie or in a story. And after all, the book is written by human writers throughout many centuries, from the Old Testament to the New Testament until today. So how do we study nature or understand nature through the Bible or through the Gospel? I think that is relatively unknown, or rather is not often preached, at least from what I have seen in my limited sphere of interacting with people and studying about the Bible and various subjects. But maybe for some other circles that the people they are exposed to, when they grow up, when they study, when they work, they might be more familiar with this topic. Maybe they are academics, maybe they are scholars, Bible scholars, maybe they grew up in a culture where spirituality and nature are very much intertwined in their life. So for them, I believe they will be very much knowledgeable. For me, I'm probably just taking my baby steps into this subject. So bear with me for those who are already very familiar, and I believe it's a very broad topic to talk about. So it helps to start from the what we can see as the foundation or the very basics. And I'm going to see this subject on nature from the Christ-centered perspective. As mentioned in my previous episode, that we can see the world, we can study the Bible by rightly dividing the word of truth between the old and the new, the old covenant and the new covenant. Covenant is another word for testament. So the old is about the law, about man's doing, and the new is about grace, it's about God doing, through man, as man, for man. So similarly, when we come to nature, maybe we can start from the beginning, the first book of the Bible, Genesis, where we see Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, where they are presented with two trees, the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and the tree of life. And then we fast forward all the way to the last book of the Bible, which is the book of Revelations, and we see the story ends with the city of Jerusalem. So one way to see is, in the beginning we see a garden that is created or planted by God, who asked Adam and Eve to look after, to be stewards of this garden, which is in the midst of the known earth. We have plant and animals which were created in the first 6 days. On the 6th day, Adam and Eve were created, and by then all the plant and animals have been created, and they are supposed to be overseers, to be stewards of this natural world, and that includes the garden. And the garden has the significance, or have the connotation of managed by humans. It's not wild. It's more like cultured nature, so to speak. And then we see that the whole story ends with the city of Jerusalem. So can we say that on the surface, what begins in a wild ends with a city, something that is completely man-made, something that is like a metropolis? Maybe some people might think that is so-called advancement, that okay, human beings have evolved, we have advanced with technology and science, so the city is a pinnacle of our civilization, so maybe nature is not as important as it might seem. Can we say that? I would say a city still need to have natural elements, otherwise it's like a desert, a concrete desert. Because as we read in detail the book of Revelation, the city of Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, has rivers or streams flowing through the trees of life. In the beginning, there's only one tree of life, but at the end, there are many trees of lives. So it's not just a city that is totally devoid of nature, but it has rivers, it has trees, many trees. It's like a forest. So I believe it's telling us that even as we are advancing, so-called technologically, we should not neglect trees, we should not neglect rivers. And I believe it is both symbolic as well as literal. And I hope to delve into that as well in this message. So coming back to the beginning. In the beginning, there were 2 trees in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were told not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And for some reason, they did not partake from the tree of life. And I'm still finding out more about the full implication and significance of these 2 trees. But from my understanding, the serpent at the tree of knowledge good and evil, they deceived Adam and Eve into eating from it by saying that if you eat from this tree, you shall be like God. So one interpretation is that they, in a sense, they are already like God, in the sense that they didn't know that they could die, or maybe they didn't know that they actually could not die, rather, because after they partook, they began to grow old, and then they finally died after about 900 over years back then for the early humans. So for them, in a sense, it's like a deceit from the snake, that telling them that if they eat from this tree, then they will be like God. So in a sense, he's suggesting a lack, that they lack something. because even though they are living in abundance, they can eat from every tree except for one tree, every tree in the garden. Except for one tree, they eat from that tree, then they would surely die, as God had told them in the beginning. But they probably have not grasped the revelation. They did not have the revelation that they are living in abundance. So the serpent is suggesting a lack mentality. And because of that lack mentality, they think that by doing something, they would have what they think that they lack. I think this is significant because even in the world that we live in, many of the problems that we see in the society and in the environment is due to this lack mentality. Even though we are living in a world where nature that is created by God, nature provides us with freely with food, shelter, resources, like the indigenous people or the native people in the rainforest, in the grassland, in the Amazon, in the African Congo Basin, and in the Southeast Asia rainforest, and so on. All these indigenous people who are not exposed to so-called modern technology, they are able to live off the land. They are able to live in abundance without using money. They are not living in this capitalistic world or capitalistic system. So in a sense, Adam and Eve are a picture of they represent the indigenous people, the native people. We might think, on the other hand, the Western media and maybe the mainstream media would rather have us thinking that the indigenous people, they are very primitive and they don't have the knowledge of science and technology like we do. So we think that they are backward. But come to think of it, the indigenous people, even though they may not have iPhone, they may not have, they don't drive cars, but do they really need all these things? They don't have this lack mentality. They don't have this idea that I must be like the Jones. I must compare myself with others to be more successful. So they live, these indigenous people, they live in communal wealth. They share their wealth. They are egalitarian. They don't consider themselves as more superior or inferior than one another, whether it's in terms of gender, whether in terms of their possessions, status, and so on. So I would say Adam and Eve can't be represented by the indigenous people. I mean, they are not perfect in the sense that they have their own struggles, they have their own conflicts. But in terms of the mindset, it's very unlikely. I'm talking about someone who has not really studied in detail about the sociology of the indigenous people, but from what I gather, they are different in the sense that they have this Ubuntu mindset. They share their resources. They respect their elders. They do not see one another in terms of economic worth. They have different roles. The women have different roles. Hunters and gatherers. The men have different roles. So one role is not more important than the other. So they have respect for one another, generally speaking. So generally speaking, indigenous people in the traditional societies who live in rainforests, who live in the grasslands, in the tundra, they live mainly in harmony with nature. So we are coming back to this main topic, nature. How do we live in harmony with nature? Adam and Eve used to live in harmony with nature until something happens, until they have this lack mentality after eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is a symptomatic of the modern, so-called modern society we're living in. Why are we not living in nature, in harmony with nature, like the indigenous people do? It's because we have lost that revelation. We have lost that connection with nature to the extent that we think that by our might, by our own strength, by our intelligence, by using man-made technology, we can be great, we can compete and be more powerful than others. We think we are at the top of the pyramid, of the pinnacle. We think that it's a egocentric way of living and way of thinking. So could it be the whole Bible story begin with an ecocentric way of thinking and living, in which Adam and Eve originally they were meant to be in that state of existence? That means they were given stewardship over all the animals and plants, and it's not like I think the word dominion, God told Adam and Eve, you shall have dominion over the earth, and all that is. I think it probably has been misunderstood to mean that they should rule over with in a selfish way. That means they think that they are superior than to all the other living creatures, and they should use force and violence to subjugate all the plant and animal species to the point of endangering them and hunting them into extinction, or removing their homes to the point that they cannot replenish themselves. So that came from a fallen mindset. I think that is where the whole fallen, the whole crisis, environmental crisis, social crisis came about. It came about after Adam and Eve ate from that tree. And also something significant is that before they ate from the tree, the Bible says that Adam and Eve, they were naked and unashamed. And I think it also has literal as well as symbolic meaning, because we see the indigenous people, especially those living in the Amazon rainforest, Congo forest, and Southeast Asian forest, the Orang Asli and Yanomami, and so on. They are mainly naked, and they don't require external clothing to appear as if they are more important than the other person, more important than their neighbors. So clothing is, in a sense, is something that has a powerful illusion of power, illusion of status. And they don't need clothing also because they are living in the hot tropical climate, and it would be impractical unless it's to protect themselves from cold, maybe they need blanket. So it's more out of practical reasons, and they don't have this so-called notion of modesty and all these things. So in the sense that naked and unashamed is referring to the fact that they know that they are abundant in all things, and they can live off the land. Nature provides for them everything they want. So they are very much self-sufficient. So naked and unashamed is a terminology that has to do with self-sufficiency, and having the mentality that they do not lack anything. But after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, They have the lack mentality, and they think that being naked is a sign of lack. So they think they have to wear clothes. If not, they don't feel complete. They feel disintegrated. They feel isolated from nature. So this is where we are at. In the modern society, we see that a lot of modern cities, people, they think that they cannot do without clothes. They think that clothes makes a man, or clothes makes a woman. Clothes make them modest, and clothes have a significance of hierarchy, class, power over others. The more so-called professional clothes they wear, even the kings, they wear royal robes and all these things. They are outward adornment, but they do not reflect the heart. As one verse in the Bible says, man look at our appearance, but God looks at the heart. And also in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that do not worry about what you eat, what you wear. So don't worry about food, don't worry about clothing, because God provides for everything. So I think the significance there is that the indigenous people in the rainforest, they know that nature, Mother Nature provides, or they call it the Great Spirit. They have different names for God. So the Great Spirit provides for them. They don't have to worry about what to wear, what to eat, what to drink. And this is true sustainability. It's not some greenwashing slogan that the indigenous people were trying to sell to the rest of the world. They simply live the truth without trying to market it. Whereas in the modern society, we are trying to sell the idea of sustainability without actually living sustainably. We are still living in lack. We are still depending on human intellect and technology to try to outdo one another and create inequality by the way we consume the resources at the expense of the less privileged. And so there's a lot of truth hidden in the Old and the New Testament, especially in the first book of the Bible. So after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they think that by the sweat of their face, that's where God told Adam, after he ate, he said that by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. That means by stress, they have to since they think that they lack something, and they think that they have to rely on their own efforts to provide for themselves, then it will be by a lot of stress, a lot of toil and labor and hard work. And that's what's happening in the capitalist world. And that's what's happening over the centuries, from the time of the book of Genesis, all the way to Jesus' times, where we see the people were toiling and subject to great pressure and stress, to the point where Jesus said, all you who labor and are heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest. Now we see that Jesus is preaching the gospel of coming back to nature, coming back to God. That means when we go back to nature, we are essentially going back to God. We are finding rest again, rest for our souls, rest for our bodies, by not subscribing to the system of toil and labor and competition and rat race and capitalism, consumerism. There's no need to try to outdo one another. There's nothing to prove. We simply know that we are already complete in Christ. That's our true identity. So the gospel, it has come one full circle when Jesus came. Jesus could be seen as an archetype, the archetype of humanity. And maybe there are also the messiahs in other species, who know, for all we know. But for us humans, we have a messiah which is the pattern man. That means we are to be like him. We are to be like Christ. As Paul, the Apostle Paul wrote that we are to be, we are to imitate Christ, because he imitated Christ, and we are to imitate, because as humans we have this tendency for imitation. Wayne Gerard, a philosopher, called it the, I can't remember the word offhand, but it's something to do with mimicry. Mimicry, it's a mimetic theory. Mimetic theory goes by the fact that we tend to imitate one another, to the point where society, a dysfunctional society, will imitate the majority, and the majority tend to scapegoat one that refuses to conform to the pattern of the world, and because of that non-conformist, the majority of the people, they envy that non-conformist and they scapegoat that non-conformist. And Jesus is the ultimate non-conformist. He questions the status quo. He came to challenge the inequality. He came to challenge the unjust system. So Jesus became the ultimate scapegoat in that era, and he got crucified for it, and he got killed for it as a scapegoat on the cross. So today, any one of us, if we dare to challenge the status quo, if we dare to step out of the matrix world and live by our own terms, we dare to not subscribe to the unjust system, the unjust mindset, the some mindset of competition and lack mentality, then we will also be subject to being scapegoated by the mainstream society. We becomes, I think Jesus said at one time, there is a narrow way and the broad way. The broad way is where the majority, they go along the broad way, is the path to destruction. Destruction does not mean a literal hell. Destruction, it means the destruction of the soul. It means they are living a self-destructive life. As we are seeing in the world, the society and the environment, we are seeing the climate emergency, biodiversity collapse, mental health crisis. Why? Because the majority of people are living a self-destructive life by living beyond their means, by trying to outdo one another and accumulate more and more without giving back to nature, without looking after the well-being of their fellow brothers and sisters, without taking care of the responsibility to look after those who are less well off or less privileged than themselves. Those teachers came to bring equality, in a sense, as a prophecy in the Old Testament. I think it's in the book Isaiah, says, the mountains shall be made low and the valleys shall be raised. So it's referring to inequality. The mountains referring to those in great power, great wealth, they shall be brought low. And nothing wrong with being wealthy, but those who put their trust in their great wealth, who put their trust in their status and so on, they shall be brought low. So Jesus came to lift up the lowly, the humble, the oppressed, the downtrodden of society. He lifted up. The valley shall be raised. That's the whole mission of Jesus. And I think in the book of Luke, Jesus said that he came to preach the good news. good news to the poor, and to open the doors of freedom, to set free the captives. So, when we look at the Bible, we usually see two groups of people, the oppressed and the oppressor. And any one of us can be in any of these sides or in this role. And for a number of us, we may be both the oppressor and the oppressed at different stages of our life, depending on where we are born, at which stage of life we are at. We have different kind of privileges, because the social justice world and the environmental justice world, we have to acknowledge that it's intersectional. That means some of us are oppressed in some ways, but we are also privileged in other ways, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's nationality. That's why Christ came to remind us that we are all one, regardless of the differences, that there is neither Jew nor Greek. That is referring to nationality, male nor female, referring to gender, slave nor free, referring to our social status. There is only one. We are all one in Christ. So the whole idea of coming to know the gospel, the truth that set us free, is to see that as we awake from the illusion of separateness, we realize that we are not separate from God, our divine self. We are not separate from one another, regardless, in spite of the outward differences, in spite of the physical difference we see with our own eyes, in terms of how much money or possession we have, in terms of male and female, or non-ambiguous or fluid gender, in terms of the nationality or skin color or ethnicity. All these our differences do not ultimately define us, or where we are born and so on. We are all humans. We are all part of the human family, and on a larger scale, we are all part of the earth ecosystem. We are earthlings. We are citizens of the cosmos. That is the universe. So I feel that I'm sharing all over the place, but I hope that whatever I've been sharing so far, it makes sense. So the main topic that I want to focus on, we are coming back to nature. So how do we see nature in the Bible and in the world we live in? Why are we in such a mess? Why are we experiencing climate change and natural disasters and more extreme weather changes, resulting in floods and landslides, famine, wildfires that has caused many sufferings, caused damages to property, caused injuries and death of humans, plants and animals around the world at different times of the year, and it seems to be getting worse every year. So yes, we are indeed experiencing climate change. Climate change, although it's a natural occurrence over thousands of years, through the various cycles of ice age, but there is a general consensus among scientists that at least in the last century or the last 2 centuries, since especially 1850 onwards, the Industrial Revolution, the Earth has been generally getting warmer, and which is due to the increase in carbon emissions from human activities, and both two main culprits of the increase in carbon emission. One is the burning of fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal. And second main culprit of human-induced carbon emission is deforestation in terms of land use change. So when forests are destroyed for whether for housing, industry, roads, agriculture, logging, mining, and so on, the removal of huge tracts of forest releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and similarly the removal of mangrove, which stores four more times carbon than tropical rainforest. When mangroves are removed, they also release a lot of carbon, and a lot of carbon has been also released from the soil that has been exposed through deforestation. And so the world is getting warmer, and Singapore is also heating up twice as fast as the rest of the world because of rapid deforestation and urbanization. And the last COP, or the Earth Summit equivalent, is telling us that we have to meet certain targets in terms of reducing carbon emissions and reducing destruction of nature in order to mitigate as much as possible the global warming. If not, by 2030 or in the years ahead, 2040 or 2050, the Earth will heat another few degrees Celsius. It could be 1.5, it could be 2 or more, and there will be a lot of changes in the weather system around the world. So a lot of lives will be affected, livelihoods will be affected, and the people who are most vulnerable are usually the ones who are in the global south, as well as those even in the wealthy countries like Singapore. The less privileged are the most vulnerable to the consequences of climate change, like floods or urban heat island effects. In terms of health, they will be more susceptible to heat injuries because they work outdoors. Those working in food deliveries, in construction industries, and who sell their wares on the streets. So these are the people, as well as those living in non-air conditioned places or who work in non-air conditioned places, these are the people who will unfortunately suffer the effects of climate change, whether it's extreme heat, increased heat, or whether it's floods. And so this is where we are at. That's why I think it's important to acknowledge that nature is important. It is not just a subject that is only talked about when we feel like it, or is at our own convenience, or it's not something that is it's not a side subject. It's not a minor. In this university of life, nature or the environment or geography or ecology is actually a major. So it's not like many of the city dwellers. We cannot close ourselves off and just focus let our life revolve around our small little human-centered world, or family, entertainment, financial world, passion, and hardly go into the forest. I mean, even if we hardly go into the forest for hiking, or even if you don't consider yourself a nature kind of person, and maybe because of your profession, you tend to work in the office, and then you eat in the food courts, you shop in the shopping mall, you hardly go into so-called nature places. At the most, you go to parks and gardens. Nothing really wrong with that, because after all, even the last book of the book of Bible, it talks about people living in the city of Jerusalem. So even if we are living in the city of New Jerusalem in today's world context, we still need the rivers of living waters. We still need the trees of life. I think they are not just symbolic, they are literal. We still need the forests to cool the environment, to provide ecosystem services like cooling the air, purifying the air, and reducing pollution. They provide food and shelter for the biodiverse species of plants and animals, many of the animals are pollinators or seed dispersal to propagate the plants and flowers and food crops. So without pollinators, pollinators like bees, butterflies, and moths, or seed dispersals like birds, squirrels, and so on, then we would not have food on our table. So we need them, just as we need agriculture. We can't just have a society where there's no agriculture. We can't just have a service industry and a manufacturing industry, as important as these are. I'm not against science, I'm not against technology, but all these must be centered in nature-based framework. It must be centered in ecocentric framework, not egocentric. So we need a paradigm shift by understanding the place and reclaiming the place of nature in our society, even in a city, so-called city-state. Singapore is 1 degree north of equator. We are a tropical island. First of all, we should acknowledge our natural heritage, which is the forest. We should not just talk about urban forests or urban parks and gardens. That is putting the cart before the horse. We should acknowledge the horse is actually leading the way. We should give credit to Mother Nature for having given us the resources like the forest, the air, the water. So let's not buy into the propaganda that Singapore has no resources. It's not really true that the only resource that Singapore has are human beings. That is like saying, just because we don't have oil and gas and coal, we don't have minerals like gold and silver, that means we do not have resources. But the resources that are so important are staring at us right in our face. They are our forests. We can't simply write off forests as just some wasteland occupying space that will eventually make way for development, so-called. So forests are definitely not wasteland. They are essential. They are not dispensable. They are not some side kicks or side actors. They are not minors. But we treat them as minors. We treat them as if they are invisible. Until recently, when we decided to call ourselves a city in nature, so if we have the audacity and the enlightenment to acknowledge that we are a city in nature, then we should put the money where our mouth is and not just paying lip service to nature. Nature is not some managed parks and gardens or manicured parks. Nature is wild forests, unmanaged forests, secondary and primary tropical forests, and mangrove forests, and freshwater swamp forests, as well as our blue nature, green nature, forests, mangroves, and blue nature is our coral reefs, our aquatic and marine life along our beaches, along our offshore islands. which thankfully has been given recognition in recent years as well, thanks to the advocacy of nature lovers. So we still have a long way to go by looking at the importance of nature through the lens of the gospel in the Bible and in our society. So animals and wildlife, they don't have the voice, and we need to advocate. We need to be their voice. Even Jesus, I think I'll close with this. Otherwise I'll be just talking a long-winded message. But for now, let's close with this final example. Even Jesus himself, the representative of humanity, he advocated animal welfare. Like on the Sabbath day, when he healed the sick, and the Jewish leaders, religious leaders, they found fault with Jesus for healing the sick, so-called doing work on the Sabbath day, where there's, according to the law of Moses, there should be no work done. Because in the Jewish tradition, on the seventh day, which is Saturday, or Sabbath day in Jewish culture, they rested from all work, just as God rested from His work of creation. So, Jesus' reply to the Jewish religious leader is that if a donkey or an ox were to fall into a hole in the ground, would you not rescue the donkey or ox? So he's talking about being kind to animals, even animals that have been domesticated and subject to servitude, like a donkey or ox. And he's appealing to their sense of compassion, that if they had some compassion for animals like a donkey or an ox, which are common, they are not endangered, and they have been domesticated, and it have, as cruel and cold and careless the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day of his days might be, but even they, in their cold-hearted way of relating to people, even they could show some mercy on the animals like a donkey or ox on a Sabbath day when they are not supposed to work. And by doing so, wouldn't that be considered as work? Wouldn't they be breaking their own law? So Jesus is appealing not only to their sense of compassion, it's appealing to the spirit of the law. It's not meant to be followed by the letter. It's meant to be followed by the spirit. So, if we follow the letter of the law, we can be very legalistic. We can be very selective without even trying to be selective. We will say, okay, this is allowed. Oh no, that is not allowed. So it's subject to people's whim and fancy and subjective interpretation of the law. But when it comes to healing or rescuing, so rescuing animals is as important, or it's probably not as important as healing a human being. Because human being, in terms of God's perspective, our divine self perspective, humans are more important. We have the same value, but from our higher self, humans have the same value as the birds, as the sparrows. Because in another instance, Jesus said that not one sparrow falls to the ground without your Father in heaven knowledge. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that, look at the birds of the air, they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds the birds. Are you not of much more value than them? I would say that they are of equal value, but in terms of how much more value, that we think that we can have, we are actually worth much more. It's not saying that the birds are worthless, it's not saying that donkey or ox are worthless, but at least from the human perspective, he's saying that he's appealing, I believe he's appealing to the common cultural knowledge of his day. He's appealing to the human-centric way of thinking. That means in the highest perspective, every living thing has value. But he's appealing to, he's speaking their language, so to speak. He's speaking their language that if you think that an ox and donkey or donkey is important or valuable enough to rescue, probably for selfish reasons, come to think of it, because they need the they need the ox or donkey. It's a tongue twister. If they need maybe the religious Jews of those days, they rescue the animal, probably it's a mixture of compassion, yes, but it also could be they want this animal to continue to serve them, or they think that they can sell the donkey or the ox for some money. So I would say that there are probably many reasons, and Jesus he sees their heart. So yes, there might be compassion involved, there might be some selfish gain involved as well when they rescue an ox or donkey. But he's using their language also to tell them that how about their own fellow human being, who is like the man who is crippled. Jesus healed the crippled man, or the woman bound down for 12 years, or 18 years rather, 18 years. And Jesus said, ought not the daughter of Abraham be loosed from her infirmity, when Jesus healed her on the Sabbath day. So, he's appealing to their sense of as humans, they tend to judge humans as more important than animals. So he's using their language to say that if you think that people are more important than animals and the environment, then why did you neglect the suffering of a human being right in your midst in the synagogue, the one who has a withered hand, or the one who was bound down for 18 years. So Jesus is also saying that he is moved purely by compassion, because he has no expectation of any financial reward by healing a man with a withered hand. He had no expectation of reciprocation or reward by healing the woman who was bound down for 18 years. So he's telling the Jews that they should not look at people or animals purely in transactional terms, purely as just something that is measured in monetary value. So Jesus is a master of psychology, and he sees people's hearts. Sometimes he has to use their language. So I think that's why he said that even the sparrow that falls to the ground, your Father in heaven knows, and the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So he's reminding the Jews and his disciples how valuable they also are, as valuable as the sparrow, and they are remembered by our Father in heaven. They are remembered by our higher self. And we are all similarly valuable. So this is the last example that I want to mention, and I will say that I still am on a journey of knowing more about understanding nature from the perspective of the Bible, especially the New Testament, the New Covenant way of thinking, the Gospel of grace and peace. So, hope to continue another time, and may we continue to be kind to animals. May we continue to put nature first place, center, left and right in all our policies, in all our decision making, in every aspect of our lives. Because without nature, we are nothing. Apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. Nature and God are one. We and God are one. We are not separate from God, or we are not separate from nature. Neither are we separate from one another. And may you prosper in all things, financially, spiritually, physically, psychologically, mentally, and be in health, even as your soul prospers. Amen.